Well, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
So we're going to start in a moment. Maybe I can ask you a couple of things just before we... maybe save them for later. I don't know. There is what appears to be a mental health epidemic in the world, and devotees are not exempt. Seems like now a lot of people come with a lot of baggage. That is that a new thing, or we just had it hidden before? When we joined, we just swept it under the rug, and it wasn't much of an issue.
I think that both things are going on. One is, I think we're far more aware now. It's easier to talk about. So it's getting picked up much more. And sometimes even things which aren't mental health issues are being deemed as a mental health issue, and when really it's about character and choice. The other thing is, I think mental health problems are on the increase. Definitely. Actually, I think they are on the increase. We're having a lot more trouble with the mind. But I guess maybe we can go into a little bit more in the Q&A after the class. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I actually sent your picture and bio description to everyone that is in the link, so they know who you are. And again, thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome.
And please take it away. And
thank you so much for inviting me. We start with Jai Radha Madhava as usual. Some platforms have different things. So
as you wish. We're on the liberal side.
We're on the liberal side. So I'll just sing Jai Radha Madhava just short, maybe once or twice, and then I'll read the verse and the translation. Okay. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari, Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari, Yashodanandana Rajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Rajajana Ranjana, Jamuna Thira Vanachari, Jamuna Thira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. So we're reading Canto 4, Chapter 28, verse 10. Do you share screen, or would you like me to? If you make me co-host, I can share my screen.
I'm not the host, but I'm gonna ask the host to do that. He's running. He's milking the cows. I saw him running.
Okay.
So soon he will have the facility to do that.
No problem. Should I just start anyway?
Yes, you can start, and eventually you will see that you are the host, and you can share this. Okay, you're the host now.
I'm a host now? Okay. Let me share my screen. You can all see that?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So this is Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 28, verse 10. Gandharva yavanakrantam kala kanyopamarditam hatum prachakrame raja tampurim anekamataha. The city of King Puranjan was overcome by the Gandharva and Yavana soldiers, And although the king had no desire to leave the city, he was circumstantially forced to do so, for it was smashed by Kalakanya. The living entity, separated from the association of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, tries to enjoy this material world. He is given a chance to enjoy it in a particular type of body, beginning with the body of a Brahma down to that of the microbe. From the Vedic history of creation, we can understand that the first living creature was Lord Brahma, who created the 7 great sages and other Prajapatis to increase the universal population. Thus, every living entity, according to karma, his past desires and activities, gets a particular type of body, from that of Brahma to that of a microbe or germ in stool. Due to long association with a particular type of material body, and also due to the grace of Kalakanya and her Maya, one becomes overly attached to a material body, although it is the abode of pain. Even if one tries to separate a worm from stool, the worm will be unwilling to leave. It will return to the stool. Similarly, a hog generally lives in a very filthy state, eating stool. But if one tries to separate it from its condition and give it a nice place, the hog will be unwilling. In this way, if we study each and every living entity, we will find that he will defy offers of a more comfortable position. Although King Puranjan was attacked from all sides, he was unwilling to leave the city. In other words, the living entity, whatever his condition, does not want to give up the body, but he will be forced to give it up because, after all, this material body cannot exist forever. The living entity wishes to enjoy the material world in different ways, and therefore, by nature's law, he is allowed to transmigrate from one body to another, exactly as a person transmigrates from the body of an infant to a child, to a boy, to a youth, to a man. This process is constantly going on. At the last stage, when the gross body becomes old and invalid, the living entity is reluctant to give it up, despite the fact that it is no longer usable. Although material existence and the material body are not comfortable, why does the living entity not want to leave? As soon as one gets a material body, he has to work very hard to maintain it. He may engage in different fields of activities, but whatever the case, everyone has to work very hard to maintain the material body. Unfortunately, society has no information of the soul's transmigration. Because the living entity does not hope to enter the spiritual kingdom of eternal life, bliss, and knowledge, he wants to stick to his present body, even though it may be useless. Consequently, the greatest welfare activity in this material world is the furthering of the Krishna consciousness movement. This movement is giving human society information about the kingdom of God. There is God, there is Krishna, and everyone can return to God and live eternally in bliss and knowledge. A Krishna conscious person is not afraid of giving up the body because his position is always eternal. A Krishna conscious person engages in the transcendental loving service of the Lord eternally. Therefore, as long as he lives within the body, he is happy to engage in the loving service of the Lord. And when he gives up the body, he is also permanently situated in the service of the Lord. The saintly devotees are always free and liberated, whereas the karmis who have no knowledge of spiritual life or the transcendental loving service of the Lord are very much afraid of giving up the rotten material body. Om Gyan Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shriyata Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sarvadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padhan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye. Vancha kalpa tarubhyascha. Kripa sindhubheva cha. Patitanam pavanebhyo. Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I'll read the translation again. Canto 4, chapter 28 and verse 10. The city of King Puranjan was overcome by the Gandharva and Yavana soldiers, and although the king had no desire to leave the city, he was circumstantially forced to do so, for it was smashed by Kalakanya. So in this verse, in this chapter, we are following the activities of Puranjan Maharaj and his subsequent birth. And the attack on the city is also being likened to analogous to the attack on the body, the attack that time makes on the body, and the changes that come with time to our circumstances, to our body, to our mind. When we, just before we opened this, Saratma Prabhu asked me about whether we were actually seeing a real-time increase in mental health problems, or whether it's just that we're more aware and previously we're just brushing it under the carpet. The mind changes. It's by nature affected by the forces of material nature, whether it's goodness, passion, ignorance, or the force of time. The mind is very vast. Shastra tells us the mind is so vast, it can reach any corner of the universe. That we carry that within us. In the first paragraph of this purport, Srila Prabhupada is really emphasizing that being separated from Krishna, we seek to become comfortable in the uncomfortable. We make the unnatural natural. And the strongest force that causes this to happen is time. This is because of the long association with these different circumstances. What do we mean by this long association? Association isn't simply our surroundings or the people we keep the company of. When we associate, really truly associate, or with people or a situation, we're letting them in. We're letting that situation in. What does that mean? We're letting down our guard. We are accepting the person or the situation by trusting it or them. When we trust someone, we start to accept their opinion as fact, which means anything or whatever's being offered to us can become our reality. So this power of long-time exposure, time and this vastness of the mind, they work together. They work together to keep us here. So there's this, these joined forces of time, the mind, the false ego, and the senses. They join forces to, and when I say forces, we have to be forced to be here. It takes a lot to make us live in an unnatural state and make it feel natural. We've been doing this for a long time, as Prabhupada's explaining, from Brahma right down to the microbe. And the first birth any of us is given, and Prabhupada explains this in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, is of Brahma. The least tainted form, the least contaminated, the form which requires least force to be here is Brahma. That's the first birth we're all given. So uncontaminated, so close to Krishna, we take birth from the navel of Garbhodaksha Vishnu. But from there, we can choose to remain, trying to find some comfort, happiness, some sense of unique individuality, some affection and love in a unnatural state, or we can return to our natural position. But the longer we remain in an unnatural position, the more natural it becomes. If we look at the mind, the nature of the mind, only 10% is accessible to us. 90% is unconscious and subconscious. Our hard drive, so to speak, the background score to a movie, the algorithm behind a social media account, okay, the programming in the background that runs on your computer. As you feed things in actively, everything that's been going on in the background, lifetime after lifetime, acts as a hook, acts as a processor, acts as a rejector or acceptor. And because of the nature of the mind to store and to process, lifetime after lifetime, since time immemorial, since a time we can't remember, because we've carried this subtle body with us since the time we were Brahma. Even those impressions we have as Brahma, praying to Krishna, however many heads each of us had, we still have those somewhere. Somewhere they're acting, somewhere they're reacting, all depending also on what else we feed the mind. So this long-term exposure and getting us bound into something that we don't even necessarily want or need, but think we want and think we need, and then work very hard to acquire, and then are fearful to then leave that situation and won't accept another situation. This factor of time is even used now, not just time, but repeatedly over a period of time. We look at the things we wear, the foods we eat, the gadgets we buy, what we accept as new and exciting, and what we accept as old and unfashionable. It's all got to do with what we feed ourselves. What do we repeatedly watch? What do we repeatedly hear? Because repeated exposure over a long time makes the abnormal normal. This is actually how advertising works, isn't it? Any advertising, whether it's digital advertising, on YouTube, I'm sure once this is posted on YouTube, when anybody goes back to look at it, they'll have to watch at least 5 seconds of 2 adverts. Okay, the hook. You repeatedly watch 5 seconds of the same 2 adverts over and over again, even if you're watching devotional content in between. There's an impression being laid, right? And that impression, that just builds layers. Before you know it, the way the unconscious and subconscious mind work is the more you repeatedly say something or hear something or do something, it starts to come to the surface and it becomes conscious. And we go, oh, I've got a great idea. I'm going to buy this. Oh, I've got a great idea. I'm going to sing this. And this works amazing. We can use that same understanding of the mind to repeatedly expose ourselves to what is natural to us, which is our relationship with Krishna. But while living in this world, we are going to encounter inevitably whatever this world is steeped in, even if we're trying to go against the grain, especially the more we are trying to reach out, because Prabhupada created a movement, a society, a community that isn't selfish, that isn't just satisfied in saving ourselves, but a community that really hankers and yearns to serve others, not just save others. Sometimes a spiritual group or religious group may take pride in the fact that they're saving other people, or we may take pride that we're saving other people, but really actually we're serving. And through that serving of other people, we actually achieve something really wonderful for ourselves as well. We attract Krishna's affection. And he says this in the Gita, the one who shares this confidential knowledge of the Gita to the devotees is most dear to me, most dear to me. By devotees, he means those who are willing to hear. Repeatedly, he says this in the Bhagavad Gita, that I'm sharing this with you because you're my friend. And devotee says this to Arjun. Right? He regularly alludes to and directly addresses the fact that a person needs to be receptive. We also have this there as one of the offenses to chanting the holy names, as outlined by Haridas Thakur, that one should not share the glories of the holy name to those who have no faith. Why? Because if there's no receptivity, then the mind can revolt and actually be offensive and put up a bigger block than it had before. So this power of long time exposure and association makes our unnatural state feel very natural, right? Just like the person in the prison. Some people have so much influence in prison, they practically have a 5-star hotel suite in the prison. They have a huge TV, 55 inches. They have the best bed. They have the nicest furnishings. They have control and influence in the prison. So much so to a point where when it's time to leave, not only are they reluctant to leave, but they'll leave and they'll commit a crime just so they can come back. Just so they can come back. I used to work in prison services many years ago, and we used to do psychiatric assessments on people standing trial. And sometimes people would come back. I'd say, well, hang on a minute, you were released 2 days ago. Why did you do this, silly little theft? It's like, it's been 2 days. Oh no, I didn't really want to leave prison. I had everything I needed there. So I just was looking for a way to get back in. There's no psychiatric condition according to my diagnostic manual, but it's a type of craziness, for us to keep going back to pain. And it's exactly the situation that's being described here. Puranjan Maharaj is being attacked. He's being attacked. His city is being attacked. His body's being attacked. And yet to leave that situation, it's very difficult. Very, very difficult for him because he's scared of what's coming next. And what's coming next is unknown to him. And this is, again, the powerful thing about spiritual life is that it gives us an alternative. But our alternative also, we hear the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, right? You look at the Shikshastakam, the fourth verse of the Shikshastakam, na dhanam na janam na sundarim, kavitam vajagati shakamaye, mama janmani janmanishvare, bhavatad bhaktira hetuki tvai. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. So how do we tally being in this world, knowing the nature of our mind, knowing that we have to function, knowing that we have needs? We talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's hierarchy of needs, that we have to take care of the body, we have to take care of the mind. We have to take care of those who are under our shelter, whether they're in the temple, whether they're in our families, wherever they are, whether they're in our workplace. We want to take care of them. So wealth is required. Affection is required. Relationships required. People listening to us and following us is required. How do we tally that with not wanting any of it and only wanting devotional service, birth after birth? Krishna goes as far as in 11th canto, I think he's speaking about the previous life of the Avanti Brahmin. And he describes that prior to becoming the Avanti Brahmin, he actually describes him as miserly. He's speaking to Uddhava. And he describes him as miserly because he doesn't even allow himself or his relatives to enjoy anything. Doesn't allow them to enjoy anything, to have any kind of sense gratification. So we read these different things, that, okay, well, we're separated from Krishna because we're trying to be happy in this uncomfortable situation. And at the same time, we want to give up every desire here and only have a desire for devotional service. And then Krishna's telling us in the 11th canto that, well, you're miserly if you don't, keep yourself comfortable. He tells Arjun, your mind is going to be full of an incessant flow of desires. What is repression going to achieve? And he says, by nature, you can go and sit under a tree and you can meditate. He gives him many reasons why that's not the best option, but especially before he gets to the point of saying, actually, if you fight for me, then you will love me and you will come to me. But he says, actually, by nature, you want to fight. That's there. What's in your mind, what's in your hard drive is going to ultimately push your body to act anyway. Your nature is to protect others. You're a Kshatriya. You want to protect others. You can't help it. So protect others and do it for me. You do it for me, and ultimately, you'll achieve full success. So if we look at these three aspects that Lord Chaitanya is speaking about, that not wanting a desire to accumulate wealth, or beautiful women, or followers, if we break down these three areas, because these three things affect all of us. It doesn't matter what ashram we're in or what varna we have. It doesn't matter what our occupation is. It doesn't matter what our stage of life is. If we look at wealth doesn't just mean money. It's just modern society that has translated it to money. What is wealth? Wealth is fortune, good fortune, the ability to be happy and comfortable in this world. We don't strive to be uncomfortable. Even in our Krishna consciousness, it's rare that we strive to be uncomfortable. We try to do things comfortably. right? We try to do things in a situation where we are happy, because happy devotees make happy devotees, and happy devotees are nice to see and to be around. Affection and love, women, the attachment to women. We can take this vice versa, depending on people's attractions. But what are we looking for? We're looking for a relationship and affection, love and affection. This is naturally going to be there because it's the nature. It's our nature to be eternally wise and to be blissfully connected. So that's going to be there. Some desire to connect through affection. We don't desire to connect through aversion. We try not to be resentful. We try not to have relationships which are riddled with difficult emotions. We try our best to we seek out relationships where there's affection and love. And then followers. What is this? What is this actually? If we unpack it a little bit more, we're being valued for our unique contribution. So we want to be happy, comfortable, we want love and affection, and we want to be valued for our unique contribution. We actually have all of these things in our natural state. We have these things in our natural state. But again, because of this long-time association with trying to piecemeal find all of these things, our hands have gotten used to being tied up, restricted, sometimes with nylon ropes, sometimes with silk ropes. They're still tied up. And what happens is when we take to this process of Krishna consciousness, we start to loosen those ropes. And then they're unknotted entirely. And as they're unknotted entirely, it hurts. It hurts. If you've ever sat in the same position for even 10 minutes, it hurts, doesn't it? When you get up, you get fizzy feet, or you've got cramps in your legs. That's just for 10 minutes. Imagine millions of lifetimes being in a restricted situation, thinking it's comfortable. And then your discomfort starts to, you start to get given some freedom. It feels uncomfortable. So Krishna consciousness in the beginning does hurt because of this effect of time. Prabhupada explains in this purport that we are forced by time. If we, this long-term exposure to finding a natural state in the unnatural is not something we do something about. He forces us with time, kalakanya. And that time's not just the time of death. We see this as devotees, that the changes that come about in our mind, in our body, in our situations, sometimes expected, sometimes planned for, sometimes desirable, sometimes unexpected. In many ways, they force us, because even planned and desirable changes are uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable because they require us to be fearless of letting go of the past and brave to accept a new situation. So where does this confidence, where does this reassurance come from? It comes from two places. I think there's two places that I've identified. There's lots of places it comes from. One is trust the hand delivering the change, because the change is painful. When we trust the hand delivering the change and the pain, it is much easier to accept. And the other thing is really being conscious of how we've contributed to inviting that change in our life. How have we contributed to inviting that change in our life? These incessant desires that flow in and out of our mind, we're being advised not to neglect them. We're being advised not to avoid them. We're also being advised not to immerse ourselves in them, but they are there. They weren't randomly put there. Okay, the long-term association we've had has been a choice. We make choices based on our desires, but our desires come about based on what we associate with and what we expose ourselves to and who we expose ourselves to and how much we accept what we expose ourselves to as fact, consciously and unconsciously. I say this a lot because it is such an active principle in our life. Everything we do, see, hear, everything the five senses are exposed to. And in any given situation, even right now, we are exposed to thousands of different stimuli. Even if you're just focusing in on my voice and only on this visual, in the background, there are a number of noises, energies, number of touch, things touching your skin, number of tastes going on, smells, so many things. Even though we're just focused on this here and now, all of those other things are leaving an impression. Okay, so we all make a choice, whether it's blindly or informed. We make a choice about what we're going to desire by choosing what we expose ourselves to. So we can quite literally design our desires, right? If we're looking at time management, prioritizing, there are so many books on time management and prioritizing, right? So many seminars, because we struggle with it so much. So many books on discipline, becoming regulated, so many classes on it. But you look at any discipline, any regularity, any time management program, any schedule you have, what's the one thing that trumps all of it and drives all of it? It's desire. If we have a desire to do something, regardless of what our current schedule and circumstances is, we will find a way. Okay, so if we design our desires, automatically discipline follows, because we will repeatedly want to do that thing. So designing our desires is something that we as Vaishnavas can really take shelter of. We can really start to maximize that. And understand that this transition from needing and finding happiness, comfort, affection, and having our unique contribution validated in this world, how do we transition from that being the primary source of our happiness to it being a secondary source of happiness? That's what Arjun is invited to do in Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is not saying don't fight. He's saying, right now, all the reasons you've told me you don't want to fight are just actually about your happiness. And he helps him to understand who he is and transition him from finding his primary happiness in fighting or not fighting, and finding and making that his secondary happiness or tertiary, and making primary happiness about pleasing Krishna through the exact same activities. How do we do this? Prabhupada gives the answer in this last final paragraph, this final paragraph of his purport. I think that modern society is not educated on this process of Krishna consciousness. Why is Puranjan Maharaj scared about what's happening with his body and what's happening to his city? Why won't he leave? Because he doesn't know what the alternative is. What's the alternative? When we're in a state of fear, that present situation is so absorbing, it gets us so locked in. You look at any of the human emotions, when they reach an intense peak, which really binds us in that moment. Doesn't matter if it's happiness, excitement, fear, anger, they're very binding. Emotions are very strong. They're quite forceful. We need a strong alternative. The mind needs a strong intelligence to say to it, look, just stop, hold on. I know what you're experiencing right now is really absorbing, but look at this alternative. There's another option. Okay, Prabhupada speaks about how in our eternal life, we have all of these things. We're so happy. And moving in for a devotee, moving into that eternal life, giving up the body is easy. Staying in this body is easy. Why? If you're living in a house, your house is wonderful. But your house is going to collapse in 5 years' time. Okay. If you know that as soon as this house collapses, you will have a more permanent residence, which is even better, you won't be in anxiety about your next situation. Will you? You'll happily live in your current home fearlessly. And equally, when it's time to give it up, you will fearlessly move into the next home. So this is what Krishna consciousness gives us, this alternative that, yes, this world is full of fear. Your mind will naturally be driven by fear, especially when this is all it's got to focus on. But give your mind, make it a good student, understand your mind and give it some options. Remind yourself that there's another alternative, because time has an effect whilst we're living here and ultimately at the end. And sometimes as devotees, we get so caught up in focusing on the end that at the end of my life, I'm going to have this big challenge where I have to give everything up and say yes to Krishna. Yes, that's there. But actually, that challenge is there every day, every week, and actually in every moment. That what is my primary desire and what are my secondary and tertiary desires? And sometimes I feel like we get so caught up in neglecting, avoiding, or immersing in the whole bhoga tyag, in trying to create some sort of balance. We go backwards and forwards constantly, forgetting that actually, if we absorb ourselves much more in a trusting manner, because one of the things we don't believe is that Krishna loves us. If we really genuinely believe that Krishna loves us, it becomes much easier to take shelter of his words. And belief isn't just a psychological thing where you can just switch it on and off. Again, belief happens through repeated exposure, and repeated experience changes that belief to realization. A realization that, wow, based on my experiences in Krishna consciousness, I can say that Krishna loves me. So I trust everything that happens. I trust that I'm in a safe space now, and Krishna will also give me a safe space later. So when we have this understanding, and it comes again, just like the power of time and association makes the unnatural natural. So the longer we stay associated and connected with devotees, the more and more frequently and regularly and deeply we see Krishna's love for us, Guru's love for us. We see Krishna's love through devotees, through Guru, and sometimes even directly. We see that loving hand, and then the person behind the loving hand, even in our pleasure. So then we can peacefully be happy here. You take a simple example like prashadam. Who doesn't enjoy prashadam? Is that Maya? No, we enjoy it with our taste buds. We're not always enjoying it transcendentally. Wow, I can taste Krishna's saliva in the prashadam, or I can feel Krishna's presence, or I can feel the potency of this prashadam and this consciousness. Sometimes we can, and those who are more advanced can experience that on a regular basis. But on a base level, we enjoy the taste of prashadam. This doesn't mean we're worse devotees. This doesn't mean we're low level. This doesn't mean Krishna rejects us. He allows us to have love and pleasure and validation in this world. He allows, and not just allows, encourages Arjun to have that. But he said, but have it for me. Because I've designed your life for you. I live for you. Start living for me. And when we live for each other like this, then the natural returns. The natural returns. If we continue to design our desires, we'll find that our future will be different and our present will change. And if we start to have things in our life, experience things in our life, which seem to be outside of what we've been designing and exposing ourselves to. Sometimes we've been like, hang on a minute, I've only associated with devotees, only heard Krishna Katha, I've only done morning program for the last 5 years, or the last 6 months. Now, why has this difficult situation, or even this wonderful material situation befallen me? Why have I suddenly inherited $1 million, or why has $1 million suddenly been taken away? Because we've also designed a lot based on our previous desires and exposures. And so this is where we're advised to stay on that ship that gets us across the rocky ocean of material existence, the stormy ocean of material existence. Just hold on tight, because you will see the destination. So this is actually this whole chapter, this section, actually these few chapters that look at the life of Puranjan Maharaj, they serve as a real reminder that understanding how material nature works, understanding how the vehicle of the body and the mind and our situation in this lifetime, each of our unique situations works in relationship to Krishna, in relationship to who we actually are. And more education around it and more experience of it actually makes us more fearless. Because that's ultimately what we need. We need fearlessness day to day and at the final test, at the end of this life, that we can fearlessly say yes to Krishna and fearlessly say no to everything else, knowing that we'll be safe. I remember Bhakti Maharaj sharing with us in his final days that, when it's your last time on this planet, the mind puts up more of a fight because normally for the mind, it doesn't worry so much. Subtle body doesn't worry so much when we transmigrate. It's like, yeah, the body is going, but I'm sticking around. I'm coming with you to the next body. In fact, we've designed the next body together. I've already, formed. Your subtle body's already formed into the next gross body. It's already there, and we see that, right? We see people's consciousness changing their physical appearance. We see that sometimes as you see some devotees as they get older, they almost become more effulgent, because you see that their consciousness is so advanced and so absorbed. And you see sometimes others, like even just general regular people, they may have beautiful features, etc., but their mindset's so negative. There's a disfigurement, almost a disfigurement that can't be seen with the gross eye. So the mind is kind of like, yeah, well, doesn't really put up a fight. We're going to the next body anyway. But Mirage, he was emphasizing that when it's your last time, the mind puts up a really big fight. Because like, okay, I need to pull out everything that's ever been exposed to, or you've experienced everything and anything. Because you can have anything. We can reach any corner of this material universe. You can have anything you want. And he was saying that you've got to say no to every single thing that's offered and say yes to Krishna fearlessly and with affection. Because where there's no fear, there's love. And where there's love, there's no fear. So I'd love to hear some of your reflections and comments and realizations and any corrections you may have. Thank you so much for having me. Krishna.
So if you want to raise your actual hand or virtual hand, you can do that now. Otherwise, in the meantime, I'll ask you a question. It seems like you said that we should trust the hand that is delivering the change. Mm-hmm. Sounds a little bit like the Stockholm syndrome to me.
Yeah, well, I'll explain what Stockholm syndrome is. Stockholm syndrome is when a caregiver, or usually a parent, is creating illness in a dependent of theirs as a way to get some secondary care. The trust that the dependent or the child has on their caregiver is usually a consequence of trusting the fact that I'm related to you. By trusting the hand that delivers the change or the pain, when we say we trust Krishna, he's not asking us to do it blindly. In fact, he warns us against it in Bhagavad Gita. He warns against the dangers of blind faith, but equally blind doubt. So that's why I was emphasizing designing our desires, and Prabhupada's emphasizing in the purport, education, understanding what is the alternative. Well, why should I trust Krishna? This is why we read, this is why we're here. We want to know who Krishna is. Arjuna asked him the same question. He goes, well, how come you explain this knowledge to the sun god millions of years ago? He's older than you. He's questioning him. And he loves Krishna and he's questioning him. Like, how can I trust you? What are you talking about? Who are you? How come you know all this stuff? How come you're able to tell me all of these things? Even to a point where he tests him and says, okay, show me this universal form you're talking about. So Prabhupada wants us to scrutinizingly study scripture. Scrutinizing someone means you look at it in detail, something or someone, you look at it in detail. We also have to rigorously introspect, look at ourselves in detail. Anybody who's serious about anything, you don't hand your trust over just like that blindly. Krishna's saying this, don't do it. Find out, get to know me, hear about me, talk about me, read what I have to say, hear my story. We look at the pastimes, Krishna's pastimes. When we're hearing these pastimes, they reawaken our natural state, but they are our natural state. We are there somewhere. We just don't know who we are. We don't know that yet. So he's not asking us to blindly hand over our trust like in Stockholm syndrome. He's saying, educate yourself, find out, give yourself a good reason to start taking those early steps in spiritual life. And if you've been practicing for a long time, keep re-educating yourself. Where's the gap? Where don't you know me? Where don't you trust me? Even if we look at these three things, wealth, affection and love, and followers, right? Each of us at any given moment, one of these things is a priority for us, okay? We're looking to seek how to make ourselves more secure in that area because life is always changing. That's why balance it's constantly got to be recalibrated, right? You can't just, okay, what's balance now? It's not going to be balanced in 2 years' time. It may not even be balancing in 6 months' time. So this is what it means. Spiritual life is a science. It's a conscious activity. It's not passive. It's not just, okay, I'm going to pray and everything's just going to happen to me. It's conscious. Prayer is actually a conscious dialogue. It's like a therapy sessions are a loving, non-judgmental space. Prayer is that loving, non-judgmental space with Krishna. That's where we start to experience also that the trust, why we should trust Krishna. So spiritual life is multi-sensory, is multifaceted. We can experience Krishna through knowledge. We can experience him through our intelligence. We can experience him through our senses. We can experience him through our thoughts, through our relationships, through our feelings. He can communicate with us through any way, but we need that education to understand it, because that education provides us a tool to translate what happens to us. We need the language code. We need the code, right? To understand anything, we need a code. You go to another country, what's the code to understand what they're saying? The code is the language. You understand the language, you understand what someone's saying to you. Let's try and understand. There's this term, jnana chakshush, seeing things through the eyes of knowledge or scripture. Scripture are his words. They're his story. They're his version, saying, listen to me. I'm here, I'm talking to you. We've been separated, not disconnected, but separated for a long time. If you want to get to know me, here I am. Hear my words. Does that make sense? So no Stockholm syndrome, no blind trust. And as we, progress, we are going to need different things. Maybe we need to be more specific about the pastimes we read. Maybe we need to be more focused in on particular areas of philosophy that pertain to the stage of devotional service that we're at. Old solutions don't work for new problems. Is that okay, Krishna?
It is okay, although I thought you were explaining more Munchausen by proxy, that the Stockholm syndrome.
Yes, you're right. I did do Munchausen by proxy. You're right. I just didn't want to go back and correct myself and get into the whole diagnostic thing. Yes, I did do Munchausen by proxy. But the point is about trust, right? Not blindly trusting.
Okay, we have some questions. I just wanted to introduce a very small point here. Sure. You spoke about trust, which is fundamental, as we hear that Rupa Goswami recommends in the exchange between devotees to exchange prasadam and gifts and confidences. And the part about confidences is a little bit iffy, as again the issue of trust comes, and you seem to talk about it with such ease, and yet it is not so evident, so obvious of whom we can trust. And if we cannot trust someone in our proximity, how can we trust someone who's been, yes, within our heart, but yet so distant for so long?
Okay. So I'm actually going to come back to Stockholm syndrome then, because it ties in. So Stockholm syndrome is about the trust that one develops in and allowing an abusive situation to continue. How does an abuser allow someone to stay in that situation, right? Because they develop trust in a very skewed way. They develop that, they make that person trust them by creating a problem and giving them the very same solutions. There's lots of ways abusers do that. But they do it over a period of time. Again, it comes back to this period of time. Trust doesn't just happen. Trust is developed, okay, especially as conscious, awake adults. We can't look at someone and go, oh yeah, I trust that person. We may do, because we've had some previous experience of them in this life or previously, right? People, that's our soulmates. Oh, that person's my soulmate. We hit it off as soon as we met. And there's an immediate trust. Doesn't matter if it's romantic or friendship, whatever it is. Yeah, we just hit it off. How did that trust happen? The investment in that relationship happened at another time, right? I look at sometimes, I remember the kids I went to school with, primary school. In primary school, we are so carefree. And some of them, I haven't seen them for 30 years, 35 years, 40 years. And there's an innocence at that age. You don't have your guard up. But when I've encountered them, there's an immediate trust I have of them. Why? Because we shared a very carefree time and close time in our lives where things were not occluded, they were not contaminated. Okay, so this trust doesn't just happen. It has to be created, right? By regularly investing in a relationship. So some relationships are new. Some relationships have already been invested in. And every relationship goes through a period at some point where the trust is shaken, it's tested. It's tested because we make mistakes. Okay. Really, really deep, loving relationships happen because they are created. They're created by the two individuals who are committed to investing time and energy into engaging in those 6 loving exchanges, allowing mistakes to happen, forgiving people for those mistakes, and then investing in going deeper and trying to love the other person even more. That's hard work. Okay. And when we can do it here, it becomes very easy to do it with Krishna, because he's actually much easier to deal with than our conditioned state and dealing with another person's conditioned state. But it requires repeated endeavor. And when we have that, then it's very difficult to get abused as well, because we know what real love looks like. It's easy to be abused if we don't have healthy, loving relationships. When we have healthy, loving relationships, they may even come at a later time. You go, oh, hang on a minute, this is not healthy. And you'll get out, even if you've been manipulated into thinking that it is a healthy situation. Because what intelligent person will stay in a situation where they're not being treated properly? It's when their intelligence has been compromised by manipulation, right? But we have to be able to recognize manipulation. And we can only often recognize it when it's contrasted with a clear, loving relationship. So that's why, I know this hasn't, since you brought up Stockholm Syndrome, if there are those who are in difficult situations and abusive situations, the best thing we can do for them sometimes, rather than saying, get out, is actually be a really good friend to them. Because if you're a really good friend, the contrast between having a really good friend and an abusive person in your life starts to become so evident, it gives you the strength to leave the abusive situation, or at least change it if you can't leave it. Thank you for your questions, Prabhu. I think there's 2 hands up. I don't know who went first. I can see Prima Kishori Mataji and Yashoda Mai Mataji. Hare Krishna. Yashoda Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Oh, Prabhu Jai. So
obeisances.
It's always so nice to see you and to hear from you. Thank you so much. You're just an overflowing well of wisdom and compassion, and I'm so appreciative of you.
Thank you.
Prabhu, so Sarvatma Prabhu was mentioning about this increase in mental problems, and Gurudev forecasted this 20 years ago that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
What I'm noticing as a herbalist is that a lot of people are coming to me with either themselves or people that they know and love, their children or their spouses or whatever, with allergies that all I can tell them is that the person that you're talking about is allergic to the world. One woman was talking to me yesterday about her son, like asking for help with him. He's allergic to air, he's allergic to fruit, vegetables, he's allergic to lettuce, allergic to everything. And it was like, I was just thinking, this person to me, it feels as though this person doesn't really want to be in this world, that they've realized that this world is not where they are supposed to be, and they're just rejecting it. And I was just wondering whether psychologically or mentally there's something that you understand about how the body reacts when the mind realizes that they're not really supposed to be here.
So if we look at allergies generally, allergies are the body's gone into hyper defense mode against a particular thing. Okay, so there's a lot of inflammation. Sometimes that inflammation is so severe, you choke up, you stop being able to breathe, right? Generally, then there's food and intolerances to so many other things, hay fever, eczema, etc. And there is definitely this, I mean, I see it in a lot of my patients who have anxiety disorders. They'll often have allergies. The allergic state can be created when, what happens in the mind manifests in the body. I'm fighting. This place doesn't feel safe. So there's definitely a truth in that when we have some realization that I'm not safe here, our body reacts. Whether that person has awareness that I don't want to be here and this is not my home, they may not be cognizant of it. Another thing, though, is I'm seeing more of that in young people today because so many of them just live in the subtle realm, being on digital media all the time. So the body's less and less developed. It's quite fragile. And they live in these hyper fearful states because a lot of digital media, and those of you who are interested, if you've got kids, I did a podcast yesterday, the Bhakti Kids Sangha on, it was on spiritualizing digital media and just the impact on kids and how we can reverse some things. But just being in that state where you are constantly or spending the majority of your time in the subtle body and in situations which are there to create more fear, because generally digital media is playing on our fear. It just is. It keeps us locked in. I'm going to create a need for you, a need that you don't have, and then provide you the solution for it. And so you'll keep coming back to me. And when you do that and your body is not developing, your body is not growing properly, because our body gets strong by what? I mean, you look at many of us, our generation and older, we were brought up playing outside. We were exposed to the elements. Our body became stronger just by being exposed to the elements, right? We developed a resilience to the allergens that are there around us. So the fear was less. Our body didn't react with fear because it knew what to do with it, right? So there are so many layers to being fearless physically, being fearless psychologically, and spiritually, ultimately being fearless. We have to take care of fear, love, and trust on all three levels. And when we spend a lot of time in the digital world, the body's not getting those interactions and experiences that make it feel safe and protected and help it to develop resilience. Equally, depending on what we are spending our time doing with the mind digitally, whether it's hearing a class or whether it's shopping online or scrolling through videos, whatever it is also, if it's not healthy, if it's not nurturing, if it's not creating safe psychological patterns, then again, we're living in a state of fear. So if your body's in a state of fear, your mind is in a state of fear, and your mind is less resilient, your body's less resilient. Because if you look at digital media, it hooks you in with Rajagun, right? The motive for any digital media is to make money. Doesn't matter what the method is, it's to make money. That's not sattva or transcendence. That's passion, a quick fix. I want a quick fix, right? It's quick, it's satisfying, and it's you get it immediately and it's repeatable. But then it puts you in tamagun, right? Puts you in ignorance, where that then controls you, right? Addiction. And dependence, actually, more than addiction, dependence. So this fearful state, the body reacting to a fearful state, if our body and our mind is in a fearful state, it's going to be really hard to surrender to the spiritual state of fearlessness. Really difficult. So when we encounter, especially as healthcare professionals, people who are whose bodies or minds are reacting to feeling unsafe, it's part of our service to really, and it's a really helpful service to allow those aspects of the person to heal by way of it being a medium for them to then connect with spiritual fearlessness. So the service you're doing is wonderful, and they're blessed to encounter you, because even if you don't get to directly speak about Krishna consciousness, because you're serving in that capacity, Krishna's blessings are going to naturally be bestowed upon them just by your good wishes.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much. Such a wonderful answer. Hare Krishna.
Prema Kishori Mataji, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Chitta Shakti Mataji. Thank you so much for the nice class. I have a reflection and a question.
Sure.
So I really appreciated your witty and wisdom and insightful and spiritual class that you gave, and a lot of experiences that you shared from your own practice as a physician and as a devotee. And I really appreciated the point that you said two things is one, you trust. How do you develop the trust? By trusting the hand which you're going to hold, and also by being mindful about what brought you here, right? The desires that brought you here. The question I have in connection to that is that it's okay, that I think that needs to be revisited again and again. Like, because sometimes if I am left alone, and there is no devotee around and it's just sitting, then it gets hard. So what is your advice in those situations? Because I just can't go on hearing 8 hours of lecture or 8 hours of kirtan, or this got to be. So then there is this computer, and then there is this temptation, maybe YouTube, no, but that's against the regular principle, maybe this. So the time goes in I'm not sure if I'm putting it properly, but the time goes in bhoga tyaga principle rather than doing something productive, and then you see and then you end up with midlife crisis. I guess that's how we end up there. So what should one do?
Yeah. So what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Arjun's question to Krishna, what shall I do? Shall I do? And this midlife crisis, I want to come back to that. So remind me of that as well. What do we do? We're never alone. He said, when I'm alone, I start, doing all these other things. So we are never alone. Okay, this is why the mind is, Mirage talks about this a lot, that the person we associate with most 24/7 is our own mind. So just going back to this principle of whatever's there in that hard drive, in those quiet times, that's when we hear it. Even in our japa, think about when we're chanting, what is it that our mind gets distracted by? Either our desires or our aversions, right? Whatever we want to avoid or whatever we want is what we end up thinking about. That's why Krishna emphasizes this point of purpose. Do something meaningful in the service of others. When we are busy serving others, then there's less time for the mind to trouble us with the ghosts of the past. However, we don't want to immerse ourselves with doing and become workaholics, because reflection is such a big part of our spiritual practice. Okay. So, it's this is one of the reasons I often reflect on. We've got to be regularly looking at, what am I doing with my time? What am I doing with my time to nourish myself and in the service of others? And am I still hanging on to old schedules and old activities that worked for me 3 years ago, but they don't work for where I am? I don't mean to make any assumptions, but maybe you're a parent and you have kids, right? You'll have a particular schedule when your kids are very small. And it almost feels like you're squeezing in the time to chant and read, etc., waiting for the day when they start school. So you've got 6 hours in the day when I can do whatever I want. I'm going to read and I'm going to chant. Then those 6 hours a day, they come, right? Because they've started school. Your schedule's changed. But what's the plan? Because if there's no plan, your mind will go, oh, good, let's just relax. It's time to just chill out a bit. You've given the last 5 years to the kids day in, day out. You've now got 6 hours to yourself. Just relax. We'll get to the hearing and the chanting in a bit, and you'll find, but then a notification pops up on your screen and you go to your phone. Oh, that's interesting. I'll watch this for 2 seconds. And then the next video comes, 2 seconds turns to 5 minutes. Oh, it's only a 1 minute video. I'll add another 1 minute, right? And then it becomes an hour and 2 hours. And it's like, oh, I've got to pick up the kids. No. And then the next is like, right, no phone. And I'm going to fast today. And I'm just going to absorb myself in chant. So I get it, but a lot of it is because we ask Krishna, I can't wait till I have this much time. So that time will come, don't worry. So what's your master plan for connecting? It's like we're saying, Krishna, keep it in your diary. In 5 years' time, we're going on a date, 6 hours a day. All right. We're going to spend time together. I'm going to sing for you. I'm going to call your name. I'm going to read about you. It's going to be wonderful. And she's like, right, I'm putting that in my diary. You said 5 years, yeah, when your kids start school, 6 hours a day. He's there, he's waiting, and we don't show up. We don't show up because we didn't route how we're going to get there. We don't plan our activities. So do you see? I mean, I'm kind of turning it into a story and things like that. But we've got this good that the mind needs to reflect on the past, some time to reflect on the past. Yes, this is my past patterns. They're going to affect me. The mind needs anchors for now. What am I going to do today? Right? Mirage, he would every single morning make a list of what he wanted to do for Srila Prabhupada each day. If we can't be accountable to ourselves, let's be accountable to somebody else. Let's be accountable. Like as a mother, you're accountable to your kids. I've got to do this and this and this for my kids, right? As an employee, you're accountable to your boss. If you're in the temple, you're accountable to your temple president, right? So what do I have to do? We like actually being accountable to other people. And it's so much sweeter when the accountability is for someone we have affection for. But we also need future plans, because we need those stepping stones to reach us to the ultimate destination of unconditional love. Well, how am I going to go from conditional to unconditional? Surrender is a process. It comes in stages, which brings me to the midlife crisis. Okay, I like calling it a midlife metamorphosis, because it's from when we go from a caterpillar to a butterfly. It's an opportunity to go from caterpillar to butterfly, because many of us, we spend the first half of our life living for other people, because we want to be validated. We want to be appreciated. We want to be someone in this world, right? And it's important, because having an ego in this world allows us to function. If our ego is disordered in this world, if the false ego is very disordered, it's hard for us to even develop a spiritual ego. It's difficult, because we end up feeling exasperated being here. So we develop, even in our service, even in our community, we want to have a role, right? Who's the person who puts out the rubbish? Yeah, I'm the person who puts out the rubbish. What do you need to know? Like even that, like we want to have I have some sense of identity here. But there comes a point in our life where, like, you know what? I want to live for my values, and not just my values, but I don't want to live to work. I just want to work to live. I want to work in a way that it actually allows me to live spiritually, whether your services are outside or within the community. Same, our mindset starts changing. And so it may feel like, oh, my surroundings and the people around me just don't fit anymore. And so then people are like, right, let me change my surroundings, get a new car, get a new man or woman, get a new this or that, new house, or an entirely different career. Those things can help. They may genuinely be a shift that needed to come. But more often than not, what we're seeking to do is manifest what's going on internally, especially in our spiritual life, much more externally. That we want what's going on for us devotionally to be manifest there in our external activities. We need that much more. And when we do that, when we take that midlife crisis, that challenge, that pressure that Krishna gives it, your first half of your life is over. You're not preparing anymore to stay here and to be present here. You're now preparing, you're thinking about how you're going to exit. How do you want to live in these last few decades so that you exit fearlessly and you don't sit there scared like Puranjan Maharaj to leave a city that's falling apart? But actually, you know what? There's another city waiting for me, much better. It's my eternal home. I'm out of here. But I want to live these next few decades. So, not just I'm out of here. Maybe I can serve some people and take them with me, or inspire them to feel safe going to the next destination, whether that's your children or whether it's your family, whether it's the community you look after, anybody, whether it's a passerby in the street. This is the power of devotees. A devotee smiles at you. You don't just get a regular psychological smile, which boosts your endorphins, okay, and your oxytocin. You actually get a blessing, because the only thing devotees want to give anyone else really is, Krishna bless you. I hope you remember Krishna. That's a powerful smile. Get out there and smile at people and change their lives. Is that okay? So make a plan. Make a plan. And those things that you seek shelter of online or whatever your bhagatyag is, there's a need there. That's why you accept and reject. There's some need there. Find a healthy way and a guiltless way to fulfill your need. Don't feel guilty. Krishna didn't want Arjun to fight with guilt. That's why he spent so much time going through the different layers of the self. If we live in guilt, it's really hard to practice Krishna consciousness.
So nice. If you write a book on highly effective habits of devotees, I'll be happy to be of some service.
Thank you. That's a nice idea. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Chintamani Prabhu, Hare Krishna. Obeisances.
Hare Krishna, Chidi Shastra.
Nice to see you.
So nice to see you. Thank you as always for your rich and spiritually inspired and realized offering, and your actually lifetime of commitment to give this to like so many people. So many nice points. I want to follow up with Prema Kishori said, because as I was listening to you, I'm like, Chitty needs to write a book. Like, oh, such wisdom. I really was so taken by this point of designing our desires. So that's going to be my mantra. And you shared how we can be very intentional around that. So designing our desires and how designing our desires links with discipline. There's so many points I want to ask you to speak more on, but we don't have time. So I'm going to keep this point in mind about how intentionally designing our desires can help us to be more disciplined with the things that we want to create spiritually and in other areas in our lives. But something that you said, I would really like you to expand on more when Sarvatma Prabhu asked the question about trust. And you talked about how trust is created by regularly investing in relationships. And so you said intentionally engage in the 6 loving exchanges. And this part struck me, allowing mistakes to happen and forgive. So this thing of allowing mistakes to happen, knowing that's going to be part of our relationships and to forgive. So then that made me think about how sometimes our expectations of Krishna are unrealistic, similarly to our expectations of our relationships with people. Like, you know, if those love us, they, you know, shouldn't make mistakes, they shouldn't hurt us. So can you speak to how some of our misunderstanding about Krishna's loving hand causes us to not want to go closer and causes us to not want to invest in our relationship with Krishna?
Yeah, that's a deep question. We're used to being perfect. That's our natural state. Our natural state is perfection in a perfect relationship with a perfect person, perfect people, even with each other. That's our natural state. But we've come to an imperfect world, and we're very aware of that, right? But we are aware of it because we see mistakes happening all the time. But all our movies and songs are about perfection, right? Aren't they? So we're seeking perfection in an imperfect world. This is part of the illusion when we look at, the enemies of the mind. Part of our illusion isn't just that I am this body, but that this body, somehow in this body and in this world, I will find the perfection that I have naturally within me. We look at social media, cameras, photos. What are we constantly doing? Even in our conversation, we're trying to create a perception of perfection. Who puts their worst picture on social media? Unless they're trying to make a point, right? Unless they're trying to make a point, we generally don't like putting our worst face out there. Right? We generally are trying to, if not for others, even for ourselves, creating a perception of perfection. Even if this goes back to Sarvatma Prabhu's point about Stockholm syndrome, and having positive feelings towards somebody who's creating a very difficult and dangerous situation for ourselves, is we like to have, even for ourselves, creating a perception of perfection. My life is perfect. Even if other people don't say, how can I create in such a way that to me it feels perfect? So we become very intolerant then of ourselves and others around us making mistakes. The one place where we might allow it is in the guru-disciple relationship, with this understanding that everything the guru does, including the mistakes, are ultimately perfect, right? We also try and understand that everything that's happening to me is because it's coming from a perfect person. It's actually perfect. But to get to that state of accepting it means, again, trusting Guru and Krishna, trusting the people we relate to. But when we allow mistakes to happen, those mistakes have less power over us. Because if we're trying to create perfection in an imperfect situation, we are forcing the material world to be something it's not. And when you try and force something, it has more power over you. Really simple, the wall. Right now, walls are amazing, aren't they? They keep the roof up. Right, if you went, right, I'm going to move this wall. A wall is not meant to be moved. And you start pushing against it. That wall starts to become a force that is uncomfortable. Right? Your arms start hurting. So trying to create perfection here makes the force of material nature heavier to bear. So when we're in a relationship where we are clearly going to have to battle our conditioning, and so is the other person. We're going to make mistakes. They're going to make mistakes. If we accept that that is the nature of our state at the moment, but trust that even if mistakes are made, ultimately it's for our benefit, it actually has less power over us because we're less disturbed by the mistake. Oh yeah, that was going to happen. It's like, when you teach someone, you know that they're going to make mistakes. You don't get irritated by it. Why? Because you know they're going to make mistakes. You expect it. You don't start screaming at a child for falling down when they're learning to walk, because that's part of the process. So if we accept that it's part of the process, in the process of getting to know each other and going deeper and letting go, we're going to make mistakes because quite frankly, the other person is not psychic and attuned to every single thought and feeling that you have as much as we'd like them to be. Okay. Quite frankly, they don't know our desires before we do. And quite frankly, our desires are changeable. We may have asked for one thing, 5 minutes later, we may not want it anymore, right? So then those mistakes have less control over us. And it's much easier to forgive ourselves and other people. For myself, I do, and I share this with others, like to reflect on this point of what self-compassion is. And it's actually giving ourselves permission. We're giving ourselves, allowing ourselves to make mistakes on the platform of the body and the mind, because that is their nature, and then forgiving ourselves for them. Can you give me one moment? Sorry about that. Is that okay, Mother Chintamani? Does that elaborate it a little more on what you were asking?
Yeah, it's very beautiful and lots of different angles. So thank you very much.
Can I ask something of you?
Yes, please, Prabhu. Go ahead.
You spoke about the concept of guilt. This is a very tender issue, I would think, as we come conditioned into Krishna consciousness. Even if you are born in the movement, you have certain conditioning, either from previous or from this lifetime. So I understand, or I think I understand, there are two types of guilt, one that is useful and one that is pernicious. The useful guilt, anybody can tell, if you go to the edge of a precipice and you feel guilty about continue to walk, that's good guilt. You shouldn't do it. But as far as the guilt that we feel about, let's say, our previous actions or thoughts, or the feelings that we have towards certain individual who is just struggling with the mind and senses like we are, and with previous impressions and samskaras and bad habits and addictions. So how do you classify what how is guilt to be used, and when should we reject it, and how do we get rid of it?
Okay, so there's, like you said, healthy guilt and toxic guilt. The primary difference between healthy guilt and toxic guilt is humility. So guilt is actually a blessing. Everything's a blessing, because guilt initially allows us to reflect on and become aware of what we could have done better. What could I have done better? So it's really a blessing from Krishna. But guilt also makes us, when we have to realize what could I do better, it's quite humiliating. It's quite humiliating, right? It's hard for us to reflect on how we could be better. But that same humiliation, if we reflect on it and accept in many ways that, just like Krishna says, whatever's happening in the body and the mind, the influences of the modes of material nature actually don't touch you, don't touch the soul. It's just the vehicle. Trusting Krishna, not just is saying that, he means it. We can set about saying, okay, well, let me reflect on this. What can I do differently? And am I doing those things differently? that invokes humility and draws it out from within us. It's both practice and revelation. And when we are humbled like that, we see much more clearly. We can see because the false ego is not blocking. And we can see what can be done and what comes next. And what comes next and what can be done often can be so mesmerizing that we're overwhelmed by how much Krishna cares for us. So, there's I did a retreat with Chandramali Maharaj a couple of weekends ago, and we immersed ourselves in the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So I took this pastime of Brahma Vimohan Leela, and it's actually really beautiful because Brahma goes through the same thing. He's humiliated. Krishna actually humiliates him, right? By manifesting as all the cowherd boys and calves. Brahma's there to, show Krishna who's the creator. But when he comes back and he sees, oh, hang on a minute, I stole the cowherd boys and calves and everybody's still here. He feels kind of humiliated, right? Being the creator of the universe, 4 heads, everything's a product of him. It can put you in a position of thinking, hang on, everything rests on me. What happened? So he's humiliated, but he's then humbled. He's humbled. He realizes, he says, well, there's really only one person who can do more than me. It's Krishna. And that humility, it's at that point that when he starts to realize, well, hang on a minute, I've made a mistake here. I've made a mistake. Humility starts with, I made a mistake. Then Krishna shows him all the cows and calves and cowherd boys are him. He shows the 4-armed form. And that humility gives way to clarity of vision. And as he accepts and sees that, he describes how he's then stunned. He's stunned. He becomes stunned because not only does Krishna show his opulence, but he then goes back to being his 2-armed form. And Brahma is finally able to actually see the real beauty of Vrindavan and the real beauty of Krishna. There's a beauty in our humiliating experiences. So when we take guilt to keep guilt healthy, we reflect, but then dispose of it. Don't dwell on it. Reflect, make a plan, and then dispose. Because otherwise then it just becomes Maya's double-edged sword. Does that make sense? And this is where relationships help. When we have good relationships with others, they can often be that encouragement and confidence we need that's a good reflection. How can you overcome that? Okay, now don't dwell on it. Let's see how we can improve things. Yeah. Mother Rajalila, Jai, Vaisas, it's so nice to see you. Ekavira Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Hari Hari, Hari Bol, Citi, Devi. Wow, I'm so sorry. There's so much light behind us.
It's okay. I think I've got the same problem.
Thank you so much. Chidi, as I was listening to you, I was hashtagging so much of what you were saying. I was realizing this is in terms of loving expressions. One of the loving expressions that I really appreciate you shared was about allowing, how to allow, people to really have their own understanding when they have their own understanding, and how you reflected on that with us, that comes through education. So I was kind of a little curious in terms of when you speak about education, what exactly do you mean? How are you coining that? And that's my question when you speak about education. Another area that I really hashtagged your class today was about appreciation. Now, and this last point you made to Sarvatma Prabhu about humility, that hashtag of humility is so really important, because I was thinking of Premikeshwari's question and how that question of hers was so based in humility, because she is, an educated person in terms of materially educated, spiritually educated, and she's always finding ways to serve. So that question, when I heard it, I was like, wow, she's being really humble. So can you explain a little more or share a little more light on what you mean by education?
There's many ways we're educated. Education is about learning. right? We can learn through any of our different modalities. We learn through experience, we learn through logic and reasoning, and we learn by being educated by absorbing information, either through observation or being told that. But education falls in so many categories. Sometimes we will, and generally what we tend to find as human beings, we will focus on particular areas of education and become really expert. And then we may neglect other areas of education. We can do that even in our spiritual life, right? And so for each of us, whether it's through direct experience, through logic and reasoning, or through hearing and observing higher authorities, whether that education relates to our physical sense of who we are, our psychological sense of who we are, or our spiritual sense of who we are, it needs to be regular. It needs to be time appropriate. And I think it's helpful that it is balanced and universal. So we're never going to know everything about every aspect of ourselves. Even Krishna doesn't like being in that state. Even though he knows everything, he allows himself to forget, right? So I'm by no means saying that we should all become perfect in all areas of knowledge. But for each of us, part of understanding the nature of our own mind so that it becomes a more cooperative student is recognizing which areas of our life we lack education or constructs or schema, an understanding of how that situation, that person, that paradigm works. Even the very person who lives with us, are we educated on where they're at right now? Do we have regular conversations with them to see where they're at right now? Because this is part of service, isn't it? To actually regularly recalibrate ourselves in the service of others, because our service may look very different. For us, we see this as a parent. We have to, if you want to be a good parent, you have to change the way you serve your child, because your child changes so much from baby to teenager to adult. And to not just keep the relationship healthy, but to actually really serve them, the way you express your love has to change. So education is fluid. And again, this principle of humility, if we're humble, Krishna will direct us to let us know which areas of our life need more education. But the key thing is a willingness to learn. And the thing is, our ability to learn is maximized because we're not just learning with the brain, we're learning with the spiritual intelligence. So, what can take people lifetimes to learn, we can learn in a moment. Is that okay? You probably have a better answer than me, Krishna.
Okay, so what you just said, again, another hashtag, what you learn can be learned in a moment. Can you share a little more about that?
It's especially about learning about persons in your household.
Yeah. How you learn that in a moment.
So, we're actually all so connected, because in our real life, we're so connected that when any of us has a blissful, ecstatic, loving exchange with Krishna, we feel the benefit of it. Okay. That boundary is made up of so many, we have these boundaries here, right? The boundary of the identity we have in this world. But Krishna explains that knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness comes from me. He explains that as you surrender, I'll give you the knowledge of how to come to me. That knowledge isn't just how to come to him, that's knowledge of how to connect with each other as well. And sometimes the very people we live with, we have the biggest walls up with, because we get used to interacting with each other just in the roles as we know each other: husband, wife, parent, child, whatever it is. Ashram leader, ashram follower, whatever dynamic we have, that's never our eternal identity. And so as we become more submissive to serving each other, independent of that temporary relationship, that potency that Krishna has of, as you surrender to me, the knowledge of how to come to me will be revealed to you. Knowledge, remembrance, forgetfulness comes from me. Those barriers come down between us. And there's a symbiotic connection and relationship where what might take that person, because of their conditioning, weeks to reveal to you, you understand about them without them having to say anything. Just like, you see children and mothers when they're very young, the subtle umbilical cord hasn't been broken yet. And so there's an understanding. Prabhupada talks about how the subtle body of the child and the mother is one, whilst the child is in the womb. The physical umbilical cord is cut, but that subtle body is still very closely connected, especially the smaller the child is. And often the mother will know just by tuning in, because there's less of that boundary. We put up more of these boundaries as we become more adult. And they are healthy, they're necessary for day-to-day functioning. But when we have this mood of, how can I serve you without seeking pleasure for myself, or even seeking you being pleased by my service? It requires a certain level of fearlessness to do that. And before we become fearless, we have to take a risk. Good things come to them. And we may even have to get hurt. There's this really nice sentence in Spiritual Warrior 2. It's a paragraph where Mirage talks about, if we wait for, some people are so busy waiting for real love to come in their life, they never offer anyone their love. So the real love never comes. But if we're willing to offer it first, that is naturally what we're going to attract. We are, actually, Krishna's given us a lot more control than we realize. And it's under our control whether to surrender. So yeah, that can happen. In a moment, by Krishna's mercy, we can become aware of something that maybe somebody's been holding on to for a long time, because we allow ourselves to see, because we're not attached to any agenda or consequence from it. And I know this sounds very high level, and maybe, you have to be really advanced. It's these things that help us to advance, these little risks we take. And if we can take them in the safety of our close and nearest and dearest, then it becomes easier to take them with others. And pretty soon we become real carriers of a love that actually is overwhelming for us. It's overwhelming to feel loved all the time. It spills over. When we think about those saintly souls who, when we encounter them, we feel loved even simply by their glance or being in their space, because they feel so much love in their heart. They're receiving so much love. It's literally spilling over. We're just getting the spillover. Can you imagine being like that? But it takes practice. Practice means willing to take a risk, willing to take the risk to get hurt. Anybody who's expert at riding a bike or a skateboard, I think they've been willing to take the risk of getting hurt, falling off. So we've got to be willing to take this risk that I will surrender, I will serve you, and I know I might get hurt, but let's try.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Somehow I think I can experience that a little bit when I listen compassionately to others and connect with their spiritual pain. Then I'm able to take myself out of the whole situation and experience what they're maybe going through, and just by listening. So I found listening to be very valuable. Thank you.
When you're listening, and especially as you said, compassionately listening, you're present with them, right? So they allow you into their experience. It's really powerful. And they experience your wonderful association, even if you say nothing. Thank you so much. I know you are a pillar of strength for so many. I'm conscious of time. We've been going for an hour and a half. So I love churning with devotees, but I imagine you have to go and I also have to go, I'm afraid.
Can I ask one more point, and we'll let you go? Is that okay?
Sure.
On the subject of humility, I'm going to tell you two different things that I've heard that made an impact, yet I don't have the realization. I can only appreciate them from a distance. And I wonder if you can go a little deeper into them and explain them to me, at least, if not everybody else. Once Satsvarup Maharaj was told by a devotee, Maharaj, you're so humble. I wish I could be like you. And he said, I've always been like this. I think it's better if you are yourself and you add Krishna consciousness to it. But the other instances, I always had a doubt about the Trinadapi Sunichana verse. Of course, I was very puffed up when I joined. I'm still very puffed up. But I as soon as I heard it, I thought this is a metaphor. This is definitely not real. It can be, you can be humble as grass and as tolerant as a tree. This is so I asked that question for my entire Krishna conscious non-illustrious career to many different devotees, and I never got a satisfying answer to yes, they told me, no, this is the ideal state and many other things. But once a devotee said, actually, the solution to that puzzle is in the second part of a verse, which is that amanina manadena. If you give respect to others and don't expect anything, then you will be as humble as grass and as tolerant as a tree. So that's as far as I got. I would like to hear your insight on both incidents.
Wow. Okay. I mean, just reflecting on Satsvarup Maharaj, Maharaj's example, for many of us, we try to recognize deep qualities based on behavior, right? And I'm by no means saying that Satsvarup Maharaj isn't humble by saying this. What I'm saying is we often will, when we see meek, mild behavior, we will assume it's born of humility. And we do that because, as you said, it's difficult to understand humility because humility is not to be understood, it's to be. We are, or actually by our nature, we are humble, right? Or we're becoming humble. We're trying to become humble. We're not just trying to have some logical construct about humility. It's very hard to logically understand a state of being. It's kind of like you can tell someone what it's like to be a mother, but until you become a mother, you don't really know what it's like. So I think that comment that Maharaj saying, this is how I've always been, better you are yourself. I think he was also saying, you know, humility can be expressed in different ways because people have different personalities. That root of humility really is, it has two sides to it. A submissiveness to Krishna's plan, but the fearlessness to make sure that the right thing happens. This is humility. You know, being more tolerant than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree and more humble than a blade of grass. That refers to the attitude we have towards our transient identity here. But in the protection of others, that tree becomes shelter. That tree becomes shelter, doesn't it? It's tolerant for itself, but in the protection of others, it becomes a shelter. And this point about the chanting and respecting others. We naturally respect others where we appreciate them. We often don't appreciate people because we don't know them. It's very hard to appreciate something if you don't know its value, if you don't look at it. You can walk past a diamond. If you don't look at it twice, you're not going to appreciate it, and much less you're not going to know its value. So this is, again, comes back to relationships. When we really invest time, we start seeing how wonderful people actually are, how much people try. They try so, everybody's trying so hard. They're doing their best. We can really appreciate it. Live in love, live in appreciation. Because when we live in love and live in appreciation, then there's less criticism. There's no space for criticism. When we give respect to others, naturally, as a consequence of that, then when you respect someone, when you admire them, when you appreciate them, if they do or say something that's difficult, it's much easier to tolerate and much easier to accept. Because you have and then with the chanting, we develop that strength of knowing, who am I? When we know who we actually are, then the character, what happens to the character, doesn't disturb us so much. So yeah, humility has many facets, but the key thing is humility for me is, just understanding that whilst this transient sense of self is important to invest in, to keep body, mind, and soul together, because actually this body belongs to Krishna and Guru. At the same time, we want to be puppets for Guru and Krishna. So if they choose to shift things around, we shouldn't be so disturbed, because it's just our role in the plays changed a little bit, right? Actors have to deal with scene changes and script changes all the time, but it requires them to know who they are. So this is why this chanting is so important. In verse 3 of the Shikshastakam, which is what you're speaking about, in those 8 verses, Lord Chaitanya takes us from Shraddha to Prem, and these attitudes, because chanting is not just about the 90 minutes or 2 hours that we chant, it's also about the other 22 hours. What are we doing? How do we treat other people in the other 22 hours? Often informs our japa. If we have respectful, loving relationships, we'll have less things to meditate on while we're chanting, which are agitating us. We'll have things that allow us to just hear, because sometimes Krishna just wants to hear us call his name nicely. That's all it is. We don't have to meditate on anything. Just call me nicely. That's it. So I don't know if I've shed any more light on your eternal question, but it's been so nice.
I think so. I think that those who think that women shouldn't be gurus, they should just listen to this class that you gave, and those retrograde troglodytes should be able to digest their words with very great ease. So we thank you for being with us enormously. And I'm going to ask, as we have this custom, for all the devotees to unmute themselves and express their gratitude in person. Please, devotees, do that now. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for the wonderful
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for your
Shakti Prabhu,
association.
thank you very
Hare
much.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you.
Thank you so much.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
So nice to see so many of you, Haripal. See you soon.
Haribol.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Radhe, Radhe.
Radhe Radhe, Hare Krishna.
Haribol, Hare
Haribol.
Krishna.
Okay, I'm going to head off. Hare Krishna.
Okay.
Haribol.
She ready.
Huh? Hare Krishna, Devaki Preeti.
Well done, my darling. Well done.
Thank you.
Well done, my darling. Well done.
Hare Krishna, Jagannath Prabhu, Jagannath Pandit Prabhu, Hare Krishna, Haribol Kamaniya. No, it's just so nice to be with. I feel like I'm home.
As usual, nobody wants to let you go after class.
Amazing.
Also, if anyone haven't had a chance, please listen to Chidi Shakti's class she gave last week in the African Yatra. It's an amazing, amazing class.
As always.
Yeah. That's a Tuesday class. Just go to the African Yatra website.
Okay, I'm gonna go. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Love you.
Hare
Haribol.
Krishna.
Love you.